Have you ever watched something or someone go from a small town story to national news overnight? These days we'd call it going viral. One day it's a name you've never heard of, next day it's on everyone's radar. And you see this person who used to be just a genuinely caring person gain instant fame and fortune, and all of a sudden they no longer remember the lowly people they grew up with or who are sitting on the sidelines of the famous circles they now live in, right? It's rare that someone like this still has time for all of those who are on the sidelines, but occasionally you still see it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Jesus X30 challenge. I am Tyson Putthoff, and this is scene 12. We're following my 3-volume book project on Jesus's life and Messianic campaign. All 3 volumes are available now in print and ebook, so grab those wherever you buy your books. I remember when I was boxing out of East Side Boxing Club in Kansas City, Missouri. I'd been showing up to the gym in the evenings and working out by myself, working the bags, jumping rope, doing all the skills work. And one night, I remember working the top and bottom bag, which is a small bag connected to the floor and the ceiling with these elastic straps. So when you hit it, it bounces in the direction you hit it. It tells you if you're punching straight on, and it whips back and forth really quickly at you and unpredictably. And man, I was good. I was accurate with my punches and I knew it. But that evening, as I was working on that bag, I remember a bunch of dudes watching me work this bag, and I just remember I'm this small town white kid from Kansas at this old school boxing gym on Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. And these dudes were legit boxers. They were fighters, they were cool, and I was none of those. And so I'm working out, and one of the guys comes up to me and he says, "Hey, come here." And so I do. And I'm not sure what they're going to say. I'm thinking they're going to make fun of me, looking like a wannabe boxer or a try hard, as I've heard my kids say. And one of them asked me, "Have you ever boxed before?" And I say, not formally. I've done martial arts, kickboxing, stuff like that. And they say, "Bro, you've got skill. We saw you on the bag and you look like you've been boxing for a long time." And now you've got to understand that this is a pretty tough time in my life. I've moved back home. I'm going to community college studying mechanical engineering. I'm not sure if that's what I want to do for my career. Dad had just been diagnosed with a really tough health situation. I'm working in his body shop. So when these guys approach me and they're real boxers and they're cool and they recognize me, it's a big deal. And after that, they start working me directly into their own workouts. And they can see that I'm also really analytical and see things a certain way, even if I may not be as athletic as they are. And so I start actually working with them, giving them feedback on tactics and footwork and workouts and becoming sparring partners with them. And they run my corner at my own boxing matches or in workouts against other gyms. And man, it was awesome. And they'll never know the impact they had on me at that point. But they're taking the time to recognize me, elevated me at a point in my life when I was in a deep pit. Up to now, Jesus has been steadily building momentum. He's been teaching and healing and challenging assumptions, but here the activity and the reaction both intensify. We're not just watching people gather to listen anymore. We're watching the movement spread in every direction, miracles that can't be ignored, rumors that run ahead of Jesus, questions even from John the Baptist, and growing resistance from those who don't want their system disturbed. And the pace is picking up. The reach is widening and the tension is definitely building. And Jesus is no longer just a teacher drawing interest. He's no longer just a rabbi with his own circle of rabbinic students. He's becoming a force that people either follow or push back against. So it's still the dry season of spring 28 AD. The roads are open, the heat is setting in, travel is up and running again. And through all of this, Jesus is on the move. He's weaving through key Galilean towns. He's making campaign stops. Capernaum, remember, is his home base. It's a busy fishing town positioned on a major trade route. It's a crossroads where Roman soldiers, tax collectors, local merchants, and fishermen all rub shoulders. It's also a good place where influence, good or bad, can spread quickly. Nain is a much smaller, more rural place. It doesn't have Capernaum's profile, but it's going to become the stage for one of the most striking demonstrations of power in Jesus' ministry. Bethsaida is familiar territory for some of Jesus's disciples. It's where they grew up and worked, and it's seen firsthand some of Jesus's works. But familiarity, remember, doesn't always translate into faith. In each location, the reception is mixed. Some respond with amazement and trust, others with hesitation, and some with outright resistance. So let's look at the story of the centurion. We begin in Capernaum. Matthew 8 and Luke 7 record this. He sends word asking Jesus to heal his servant, and he does so with what appears to be a lot of humility. He acknowledges that Jesus has authority over these illnesses. The centurion is a Roman officer. He's an agent of the occupying power. Normally, a man in this position would be the one giving orders and expecting compliance, not requesting help from a Jewish rabbi. But he does anyway. And Jesus' response is equally remarkable. He not only agrees to help, but he publicly praises the man's faith. Okay? Now, this man may be powerful, but he's not an insider, not in Jesus' world. He's the enemy. But Jesus praises the man's faith and says he's not found such trust even among God's own people. And in so doing, Jesus does more than heal the servant of this man, right? He disrupts the social script. The centurion, the one who should be in the role of the patron, becomes the supplicant. He becomes the one asking Jesus for help. And in responding, Jesus forms this unexpected bridge that could have strategic value in a town under Rome's watch. And we talked about that in a previous scene. He basically gets this centurion on the hook. The centurion now owes Jesus a favor. So moving to the next town in Nain. Here the scene is intimate, but it's no less significant. A funeral procession is moving through the village, and it's a widow's son. Her only son has died, and she's a widow. And in the ancient world, think about this, her loss is more than just this personal grief. It's economic and social devastation. She has no husband. Now her only son has died, so she's finished. She faces poverty and vulnerability. She can't take care of herself. She can't tap into her social security or her retirement. She's finished. So Jesus sees her, he feels compassion, and he stops the procession. He tells her, "Don't weep," which already people are like, dude, get out of the way. Get out of the way and stop humiliating this grieving mother. And then he addresses the dead man directly. "Young man, I say to you, arise." And Luke tells us that the man sits up and begins to speak, and Jesus gives him back to his mother. For the crowd, this is more than a moment of joy. It's a confrontation with death itself. Unlike the prophets Elijah and Elisha, who called on God when raising the dead in ancient Israel, Jesus speaks on his own authority. In this moment, the implication's unavoidable. This is power that belongs to Jesus. This is not power that he's borrowing from another. This is not him petitioning God to give him power to raise the man from the dead. This is Jesus confronting death himself on his own power. And news travels quickly. In prison, John the Baptist hears what Jesus is doing and sends messengers with a question: "Are you the one who is to come, or should we be looking for another one?" This is in Luke 7. And it's a revealing moment, I think. John's earlier preaching had been really fiery. Remember, images of axes at the root of trees and chaff being burned with unquenchable fire. And he seems to have expected the Messiah to bring immediate judgment. But now, from his cell, he's in prison, remember? He hears reports of healings and exorcisms and meals with tax collectors. And the style of Jesus's campaign doesn't look quite like what John seems to have anticipated at this point. And this is interesting too, because John has known Jesus his entire life. Remember, they're cousins. And in fact, I think there's good reason from the Gospels to think that John has had a pivotal role in actually helping Jesus to understand his own identity as the Messiah and as the Son of God. And John's been sort of Jesus's campaign strategist throughout Jesus's life too. He's Jesus's mentor in a lot of ways. So it's intriguing to me, and I still can't figure out why exactly. And I'm not going to make any definitive claims here. So I still can't figure out why John now has some genuine questions about whether Jesus is really who John believed Jesus was. He's in prison, after all, for starting a revolution that primed the way for Jesus to launch his own movement. And Jesus' reply is indirect, but I think it's pointed. He tells John's messengers to report what they've seen. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news proclaimed to them. Okay, so if you know your Bible, right now John is drawing on the language of Isaiah's prophecies, where Isaiah says that the coming Messiah is going to bring sight, he's going to set captives free, he's going to heal, declare liberation, to make the point that these acts are the signs of the kingdom's arrival. And Jesus is saying, if that's what you're seeing happening, the kingdom is here, and you've got the right guy. And it's not an easy answer. It leaves John to connect the dots, but it's an answer grounded in visible, verifiable reality, not abstract claims. It's also a little cryptic. Jesus knows strategically that he can't just come out and say, yes, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Son of God, or he would have done that. You notice he doesn't do that throughout the Gospels, especially early on. He even tells people sometimes, hey, you know who I am? Don't tell anybody. He doesn't come out and say, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Son of God. If he does, he's dead, his movement's finished before it starts. And while he knows that he's heading to the cross soon, he also knows he's got work to do before that happens. He's got to build his following, establish his movement, lay out how he wants his new society to operate. So he's okay getting himself in hot water to this point, but he can't get himself into boiling water just yet. So he responds here like he does in a lot of places, where he tells parables and answers questions rhetorically. He speaks in a cryptic way that requires John to connect the dots and to realize that Jesus is who John knows him to be. He's him. Jesus is him. Elsewhere, the response is a little less inquisitive and more dismissive. In Matthew 11, Jesus rebukes Bethsaida and Chorazin for their refusal to respond. These towns have seen his works firsthand, and yet they remain unmoved. And his warning is stark to them. If cities with reputations for wickedness like Tyre and Sidon had witnessed such works, they would have repented, Jesus says. But you haven't, and you've seen my works. And rejection here isn't neutral. It's an active resistance to God's intervention. It's seeing what God has done and rejecting him anyway. When we talk about someone's influence suddenly expanding, our minds might go to social media, something going viral. But this isn't just a 21st century phenomenon. History is full of examples of people whose impact moved from local to widespread almost overnight. In 1955, as we talked before, a 42-year-old seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She was the first to resist segregation, but her arrest became the spark for what was known as the Montgomery bus boycott. And local newspapers jumped on this, reported it immediately, and within days, this was national news. Within weeks, it was the spark of a growing movement that would reshape the civil rights landscape. And it wasn't that Parks suddenly became a different person. Her convictions were already there. Her courage was already there. But the right combination of action and timing and courage and visibility made her story unavoidable. That's where Jesus is in scene 12. He's been building momentum, sometimes quietly, sometimes abrasively, but now the combination of a Roman officer's faith, the raising of a widow's son, and the public rebuke of entire towns and the persistent questions from John the Baptist have made his campaign impossible to ignore. So what began in back roads and in fishing villages is now the subject of discussion everywhere, from prison cells to tax offices and from synagogues to city gates and all the way down to the temple. For all the public noise in this scene, miracles that make headlines, crowds pressing in, and public confrontations, the most enduring image, though, might be the quietest one. So we're at the home of a Pharisee for dinner in Luke 7, and an unnamed woman walks in. And her reputation is already known. She's branded a sinner. She brings an alabaster jar of perfume, and she stands behind Jesus at his feet and begins to weep. Her tears fall at his feet. She wipes them with her hair. She kisses them and pours out the perfume. And she doesn't make a speech. She doesn't plead her case. She doesn't try to earn her way into the conversation. She just loves him in the only way she knows how. The host of this dinner party, he sees a scandal, but Jesus sees value. He tells a short parable about two debtors, one owing much, one owing little, and asks, which will love more when the debt is forgiven? And the answer is pretty obvious, and Jesus connects it directly to this woman and what's happening here at his feet. And he says, her many sins have been forgiven as her great love has shown. So this is a moment that says something to every person who has ever felt unseen or dismissed or left out of the important conversations. In the swirl of public debate and high profile miracles and political implications, Jesus notices the one person no one else wanted in the room. And not only does he notice her, he defends her, he honors her devotion, and he writes her into the story that we still talk about today. And it's interesting because we don't know this woman's name, but we really don't know anyone else who was in the room that day at the dinner party. Remember, dinner parties were big deals. They were banquets. They were situations in which someone of power and someone with honor invited other people with power and honor and wealth and prestige to show this is who I am. This is my community. And we don't know any of them. I think that's kind of an ironic, that's kind of a theological irony, right? There are people throughout history whose names are forgotten, who had power, who had wealth, who had prestige, who had honor. We don't know this woman's name, but we know her story. And Jesus makes sure that she is not the one forgotten. And I think scene 12 makes something else clear. As Jesus' profile grows, responses to him divide. Some welcome him with trust, like the centurion who understood authority when he saw it. Some are intrigued but unsure, like John, sending questions from his prison cell. Others reject him outright, like Bethsaida and Chorazin, entire communities who saw the works but they were unmoved. And no matter how famous or infamous in the eyes of some Jesus became, he always sees those whom others overlook, those whom others push aside, look down on in shame. And he honors and recognizes the unseen publicly. The miracles in this scene aren't just acts of kindness, they're public signs that demand a response. Jesus is always doing things out of genuine, heartfelt love and compassion for people. But when he does or says things, it always puts people in a position where they have to respond to that in one way or another. To accept them is to acknowledge Jesus' authority. To ignore them is to resist the arrival of his kingdom. There's no neutral ground. I still remember the night I heard that Princess Diana had died. Some of you who are my age or older will remember this. I was in high school coming home late, turned on the little TV in my room. It had a little built-in VCR player that I'd gotten for Christmas. We didn't have cable at that point, so my options were limited as to which channels I could watch, or I'd put in my Bruce Lee VHS tapes and watch those until I fell asleep. We had channels 4, 5, 9, 11, 19, 41, channel 50 was the Christian channel, channel 62. Every station had the same breaking news that night that Princess Diana was gone. She was famous for all kinds of reasons. Her royal wedding, her style, her celebrity, the sort of modern Disney story of a young woman becoming a princess. And that's what most people knew about her, which made her death so shocking. And that's all I knew about her too. But years later, I learned about a side of her life I had never seen in those headlines. A side of her that showed her quiet in her personal work with AIDS patients long before it was socially acceptable, especially among the Christian and conservative communities where AIDS was often seen through this really cruel and misguided lens of being a divine curse on so-called sinners. It was in the late 1980s, and fear and stigma surrounded AIDS. Again, for those of you my age or older, you remember AIDS in the 80s was a death sentence. And so there was a lot of fear and stigma surrounding it. And many people avoided even touching someone with the disease. It was incurable, socially shameful, and theologically viewed as a curse. But Diana, one of the most famous women in the world, walked into the ward, sat down on the bed next to an AIDS patient, and shook his hand without gloves, without hesitation. And it wasn't a staged photo op. She wasn't just making a speech about compassion. She was practicing it in the most personal and human and vulnerable way. In that moment, her fame didn't create distance. It created a spotlight for someone the world had pushed into the shadows. She used the platform she had to say, without even using words, I see you and you matter. Jesus is as viral as you could be in first century Galilee. He's known in every village. He's discussed in every synagogue. He's questioned by political and religious leaders. And yet in the middle of all of the public momentum, he stops for an unnamed woman with a broken reputation, someone the room would rather pretend wasn't even there. In a scene full of action, it's easy to focus on the big public moments, the ones that make news, but the dinner scene reminds us that the kingdom Jesus is building has space for those who have no titles, no official role, no platform. A lot of us feel like we're on the edges of the room sometimes, unnoticed or underestimated, but we're not. She wasn't invited to the table, but she still came close to Jesus. She didn't have the right credentials, but she still had love for him, and that's what Jesus honored. The movement Jesus started changes the world on a grand scale, but it always stops for individuals. It makes room for your and my devotion, even when no one else sees it, even when it doesn't seem to count in the eyes of others, for our dedication, for our donation, even when the big donors and the big lenders get all the recognition. So in the middle of the noise, the debates, the pressures of life, I want you to remember that the kingdom is measured not only by crowds gathered or by systems challenged, but also by the quiet, faithful love that Jesus never overlooks. At the start, we talked about someone going from a small local story to a name everyone knows. In scene 12, Jesus reaches that tipping point. His words and actions sending ripples across Galilee, crossing boundaries of class and culture and geography. But for all of the public shockwaves, he never loses sight of the person kneeling in love at his feet, whom nobody else in his circles, nobody else of his stature would dare let near them, much less touch them. And that's the balance of Jesus's mission. It shakes the world while holding space for the overlooked. Lekulmad, go and learn. Come back for scene 13 of the JesusX30 challenge.